Hello and welcome to The Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samuel. With me today, of course, is co-founder of The Gaggle, Peter Lavelle. So, Peter, every 2-3 weeks, maybe a couple of months, a new villain emerges on the scene, a new country to hate. Obviously, Russia is a kind of ubiquitous presence, who can always hate Russia. Serbia, a little less so. Bosnia and Herzegovina, at least the Serbian part, less than that. Hungary, always on hand. Viktor Orban's always doing something that's antagonizing the world media. But a new villain has emerged on the scene, and that is Austria. And that's very strange. It's a very small country, 8 million. That's always the qualification for being hated. You got to be a small country. And what is Austria's great crime? Well, apparently it simply isn't sufficiently on board with the anti-Russia bandwagon. Moreover, it doesn't seem to want to join NATO. We know about the neutrality treaty, but who the hell cares about some treaty from 70 years ago? But
they do.
They do, but that's infuriating the world's media. So within the space of the last 48 hours, there have been two lengthy attacks that have appeared in key media. First of all, in Politico and in the Times of London. So let's first look at this article in Politico, and here you have the headline, which is Putin exposes the myth of Austria's victimhood. So here we have EU envoy Martin Schellmeier. His remark that Vienna is paying, quote, blood money to Russia should trigger greater self-reflection in Austria. Or to say that this guy, EU Martin Schellmeier, and we're going to see a lot more of him in these slides, he's the EU representative in Austria. He's a German, and he apparently had said that Austria had been, as it says, paying blood money to Russia, and therefore Austria is responsible for crimes committed in Ukraine because the Austrians continue to buy gas from Russia.
Well, George, just a sec here. I mean,
yes.
So Austrians are not self-reflective enough that they're Austrian. I know Austrians are very aware of their Austrian nature. Okay,
yes.
I mean, actually, very much like Hungary. It's a small country, but we're proud. So yes. I'm not really sure what kind of self-reflection they are.
I don't think so either. No, I mean, when they say something like self-reflection, it means you have to kind of agree with us, accept our criticism of you, and say, I'm very, very sorry. I didn't mean to offend you in the way that you say. It's a little like we need to have a conversation about something. The moment anyone says we need to have a conversation, it means you have to shut up and do as we tell you. That's the conversation.
That means no conversation.
No conversation, exactly. And so it says, no one does victimhood quite like Austria. Russia's war on Ukraine offers a bitter reminder that Austria remains a country that is playing all sides, professing devotion to Western ideals, even as it quietly looks for ways to continue to profit from the country's friendly relations with Moscow. The most glaring example of this hypocrisy is Austria's continued reliance on Russian natural gas, which accounts for about 55% of the country's overall consumption. Though that's down from 80% since 2022, Austria, in contrast to most other EU countries, remains dependent on Russia. That isn't true. EU continues to be dependent on Russia. I mean, we know that liquid natural gas purchases have gone up. We also know that they're buying essentially Russian oil from India. It's just refined oil, but it's still Russian oil. So that just simply isn't true that they're not that somehow we're not getting anything from Russia. I mean that.
Okay, so I mean, of course, George, in light of this criticism, the EU is working 24/7 365 days a year to build a pipeline to Austria from somewhere.
to make up. Yes, exactly. Don't worry, we'll make good on your oil and gas needs. Yeah, yes, that's right, exactly. Always on hand to help out. Confronting an Austrian government official with this fact, and you'll be met with a lengthy whinge over how the country, one of the world's richest, is struggling to cope with the economic crosswinds triggered by the war.
Well, how does a whinge look?
I don't know, but it's like, I like the the whinging. But you know, if you're one of the world's richest, you know, yeah, but you know, you then want to maintain that lifestyle. I mean, you know, Austria. I mean, that's the point. They have a very nice life. I mean, it's a very nice country, very beautiful country, and they kind of want to keep it that way. I mean, like it's a little like the Hungarians. You know, they have a small, beautiful country, and they want to keep it that way. They don't want to destroy it.
You mean like staying out of international conflicts?
Exactly, and you know that's right, and you know controlling immigration. I mean, both Austria and Hungary, I think, you know, they take a hard line on migrants coming into the country. That will be followed by a litany of examples of how a host of other EU countries is guilty of much more egregious behavior vis-a-vis Moscow. The unspoken, if inevitable conclusion: the real victim here is Austria. The myth of Austrian victimhood has long been a leitmotif of the country's bilious tabloids, which serve readers regular helpings of all the ways in which the outside world, especially Brussels and Washington, undermines them. Well, I mean, the fact that you write...
Are we going to have examples of this? I didn't know. This victimhood is new to me. It's new.
You can see that whoever's writing this, they love big words. I mean, this is obviously a frustrated writer who wants to show his great talent. You know, leitmotif, bilious, whinge. I mean, this is somebody wants to show off his extensive vocabulary.
I wonder if this person was whinging when he wrote it.
He probably was. It says, earlier this month, the EU's representative in Austria, Martin Schellmeier, ended up in the sight of the tabloids and the government for uttering the inconvenient truth that the millions Vienna pays to Russia for gas every month amounted to, quote, blood money, unquote. That's the inconvenient.
Is this a commercial transaction here?
Yes. Yeah. And how is it, you know, blood money? I mean, it's after all, his Germany is also paying money to Russia. So why does Austria get to be, you know, blood money? Now, what's interesting is this event that took place where this what's his name again? Schellmeier? Yeah, Schellmeier said this. So because the Austrians were very unhappy about this, because he's the EU's representative there, which is itself is strange that EU has this kind of representative in Austria. So the Austrian government called him in, and they were very unhappy about this comment. And then this is the account in the Austrian newspaper Die Presse about this event where he said this. He says, after around 80 minutes, the moderator allowed questions from the audience. Apparently, Schellmeier did not know that a journalist was present. An employee of the APA news agency, that's the Austrian version of AFP, so that's the APA news agency, had a tape playing. And Schellmeier didn't mince his words. In a detailed reply, the German EU official, so this is now, because he got into a little bit of hot water for making this, so now Schellmeier is explaining to Die Presse what had happened. He said, in the detailed reply, the German EU official described Austria's billions in payments for Russian natural gas as blood money. Then said Austria still gets 55%. And then says, it is surprising that no one is demonstrating against this on Vienna's Ringstrasse. And then the next day, the APA report made waves. And then the FPO, that's the Freedom Party, called for the EU ambassador to be recalled. And then Foreign Minister Schallenberg had him summoned to the Foreign Office. European Minister Caroline Edstadler described Schellmeier's statements as completely one-sided. Even the EU Commission distanced itself from the inappropriate statements made by its representative in Vienna. Then it goes on, Die Presse reached out to Schellmeier. In the conversation, the lawyer explained the context. A participant at the event gave a long speech about how EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has blood on her hands because she has taken sides with Ukraine, and this only prolongs the war. The EU should work with Putin and negotiate. And then the man in the audience called for people to protest on the streets against the, quote, warmongering EU. So this is Schellmeier explaining what happened. So he's saying it to Die Presse. And then it says, as a representative of the EU Commission, he, Schellmeier, could not let this stand and pointed to the fact that despite all efforts to reduce its energy dependence, Austria still gets more than half of its natural gas from Russia. And then there should be demonstration against this and not against the EU. But then it turns out the journalist present at the discussion cannot confirm that the visitor to the event asked such aggressive questions. Only Schellmeier used the word blood, and von der Leyen was not directly attacked either. He also couldn't remember a call for protests against the EU. The transcript that the APA employee sent to the presser only reveals the following comment from a man in the audience in the course of a tortuous statement. Vladimir Putin's political rhetoric was different, at least before Medvedev's presidency, 2008 to 2012. However, the EU gave him the cold shoulder, and this is part of today's problem. So that it seems like this is the transcript from what happened in this meeting, and Schellmeier just launched into this tirade against Austria about the blood on its hands. So this guy wasn't saying blood money. I mean, he never said Ursula von der Leyen had blood on her hands. He just said, "Hey, we could have worked something out with Putin. Look, you know, there was a possibility of good relations." So, but that already was too much for this guy Schellmeier. But anyway, so then we go back to the Politico article. It says, yet if Austria's history since the collapse of the Habsburg Empire in 1918 has shown anything, it's that the country needs outside supervision.
Oh, God. Oh, come on.
Imagine writing that, you know, you're a journalist in Politico, you're right. It needs outside supervision.
What?
Left to their own devices, Austrians' worst instincts take hold. One needn't look further than 1938 to understand the implication. But there's no shortage of other examples. Voters' enthusiastic support for former UN Secretary General Kurt Waldheim as president in 1986, despite credible evidence that he had lied about his wartime service as an intelligence officer for the Nazis. Well, the thing is about that Waldheim is that, you know, he was an Austrian citizen. He served in the war. Then the rest of the world suddenly got very indignant about it and demanded that, you know, Waldheim not, you know, Austrians don't vote for Waldheim. Well, what happens when you tell people not to do something, that they're going to go and do it? I mean, it was obviously completely, you know, ridiculous to order the Austrians not to vote for Waldheim. Because they're going to do the opposite, and of course they voted for Waldheim. I mean, if you tell people don't do this, they say, well, it's our decision. He's going to be whether he's our president or not. They voted for Waldheim. That wasn't an approval for Hitler or Nazism, but just simply disapproval of being told what to do. And then he says,
well, why is this being brought up? This is
this is almost 40 years ago. You know, we're talking about something that happened almost 40 years ago. And then,
well, I'm sorry, George, but I mean, it's a bit rich, you know, trying to pin this on in 2023 when there is a Nazi regime in Kiev. Okay, I'm sorry.
That's right. Exactly right. Yeah. Then he goes on. Not that Austrians learn from their mistakes. To this day, Austrians rarely heed the better angels of their nature unless the outside world forces them to, either by shaming them into submission or brute force. That said, the West is almost as much to blame for Austria's moral shortcomings as the Austrians themselves. The Magna Carta for Austria's cult of victimhood can be found in the so-called Moscow Declaration of 1943, in which the Allied powers declared the country the first free country to fall a victim to Hitlerite aggression. Though the text also stresses Austria bears responsibility, which it cannot evade, for collaborating with the Nazis, the Austrians latched onto the victim label after the war and didn't look back. But it's not wholly unlike others. I mean, a lot of countries then after the war, as you built up the Cold War, they're basically, I mean, even the Germans were told, well, you were taken for a ride by the Hitler and the Nazis. They basically foisted themselves on you. Most Germans were pretty decent, didn't have much choice in it. It's just the Hitlerites and the Nazis that were bad. Same with Italy as well. Well, we just need to get rid of Mussolini and the fascists, but basically Italians were a decent bunch of people.
And also, George, and you know this as well as I do, is that the Cold War was a convenient 40-year span for Eastern European countries to kind of whitewash their experience with fascism.
That's okay. Right. Exactly. Everything was swept under the rug. So this is the Moscow Declaration, and they say Austria is the first free country to fall a victim to Hitlerite aggression, and then it says there, Austria is reminded, however, that she has a responsibility which she cannot evade for participation in the war at the side of Hitlerite Germany, and that in the final settlement, account will inevitably be taken of her own contribution to her liberation. And as you say, why are we bringing this up? The Moscow Declaration, again, 80 years ago. I mean, what they said at the time, okay, Austria was a first victim. I mean, it didn't have any choice. The Anschluss was really foisted on them. I mean, it was popular. There's no question. I mean, they liked being part of Germany, but they still never really had a referendum on the matter. I mean, Hitler just went ahead and did it.
So Hitler didn't want to have a referendum.
He didn't want to have a referendum. Exactly. Yeah. So anyway, a key element of that gauzy fantasy was the country's neutrality imposed on it in 1955 by the Soviet Union as a condition for ending Austria's post-war Allied occupation. That's a pretty good deal. The Soviets moved their forces out. All they asked in return is you don't join NATO. You are neutral. They didn't even say you got to be friendly with us or anything like that. You don't join NATO. I think that's a good deal. It's a deal that the Ukraine should have taken. And everyone, more cooler heads will say, well, we do have a model for a neutral country in the center of Europe, and it's called Austria. Okay, so they want to denigrate it. They want to denigrate it instead of foisting it up as an example. See, it can be done. This is just so criminally immoral. It's really disgusting, George. It should be promoted. Yes, absolutely right. And notice what they're doing here, because the Austrians are saying, that was a good deal then, and it's a good deal now. They're not saying, hey, let's change this. They're not doing what Sweden and Finland are doing, which is, hey, yeah, let's now forget about it and let's join NATO. No, Austria is saying, yeah, we're kind of happy with that. I think we got a good deal, and we want to keep that good deal. And that's what's just enraging the political outlets. At the time, Austrians viewed neutrality as a necessary evil towards regaining full sovereignty. Again, how do you know it was an evil?
I see no evidence that it was a necessary evil. As a matter of fact, I think they were rejoicing that they're not going, because Germany remained occupied to this day. Okay. Yeah. I think the Austrians are going there. Hey, we got it. We dodged the bullet and embrace it.
Right, exactly. You're absolutely right. Germany was occupied during the Cold War and continues to be occupied. It's just whether the Germans want it or not, they still have to put up with American occupation. And so the Austrians don't have American occupation. That's a really good deal. During the course of the Cold War, however, neutrality took an almost religious quality. In the popular imagination, it was neutrality coupled with Austrians' deft handling of Soviet leaders that allowed the country to escape the fate of its Warsaw Pact neighbors while also doing business with the Eastern Bloc. Well, They had a good deal. They didn't, their neighbors, Hungary, they had a communist government. Austria didn't. So it was, and Austria got rich, became a very successful, prosperous country. I mean, yeah, I mean, why wouldn't they be very happy with that? Today, Austrian neutrality is a little more than a convenient excuse to avoid responsibility.
Oh, really? Oh, really? Okay. As things are going in Ukraine, if I were Austria, I'd say, I'm glad we're not part of this mess. Okay.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Austria's center-right-led government insists that on Ukraine, it is only neutral in terms of military action, not on political principle. In other words, it won't send weapons to Kiev, but it does support EU sanctions and allows arms shipments destined for Ukraine to pass through Austrian territory. So they're still anxious to, to say, well, at least we're not as bad as the Hungarians. I mean, Hungarians say no, even through our territory. At the same time, many Austrian companies continue to conduct brisk business with Russia, for which they face little criticism at home. And not unlike, that our friend, the Estonian Kaja Kallas, brisk business. And then in the Austrian population as a whole, decades of fetishizing neutrality, I like fetishizing neutrality, has left many convinced that it's their birthright not to take sides.
Yeah, it is now. Yeah, it is. It's right. Enshrined in the law. Okay.
Right.
It's internationally recognized up until 15 seconds ago.
That's right. And it says, most are blissfully unaware of EU's mutual defense clause, under which member states agree to come to one another's aid in the event of armed aggression. Most people are blissfully unaware of this clause. So it's in the EU treaty. It's even more meaningless than NATO's Article 5. It says, if a member state is the victim of armed aggression on its territory, the other member states shall have towards it an obligation of aid and assistance by all means in their power. I don't have any power. So what do I do now? In accordance with Article 51 of the United Nations Charter, this shall not prejudice the specific character of the security and defense policy of certain member states. Yeah, it's, I mean, my
but this whole article is prejudiced.
Austrians seem unaware of this. Well, I think most people are unaware of this. But so, yeah, I mean, I'm not quite sure what obligations this foists on Austria, but I don't think it has anything to do with neutrality. That mentality explains why Austria's political parties, with the notable exception of the liberal neos, that's it. It's always the liberals, they're the good guys. The liberals, they're always the most belligerent. Refuse to touch or even debate the country's neutrality and its security implications. In March, just as Ukrainian President Zelensky began an address via video to Austria's parliament, Freedom Party MPs placed signs stamped with neutrality and peace on their desks before standing up in unison and leaving the chamber. The far right wasn't alone in its disapproval of Zelensky. More than half of the Social Democratic MPs also boycotted the event to avoid upsetting Russia. Well, how do you know they didn't boycott it because they just wanted to they didn't like anything that Zelensky had to say? I mean, I'm not sure that they care very much whether they're upsetting or not upsetting Russia. I mean, Austria is nowhere near Russia, so I mean, I don't quite know why that would play such a big role for them that they have to. Oh, I don't want to upset.
Well, and also everyone, after the sanction regime started after 2014 with the return of Crimea to Russia, there were a lot of the EU put a lot of barriers up for Austrian agriculture. People forget it, but it's an agricultural country. Yeah. Milk, cheese, the whole works. It's been a very good quality, by the way, and it hit them hard. Okay, and so I could imagine some of these social democratic MPs saying, we've been experiencing this whole sanction thing now for 9 years. Okay, right. That's what they're protesting is right. EU sanctions. Okay, did anybody take a poll and they were leaving why are you doing this? Is this against Russia? Is this against Russia? Is this? No, they didn't do it. Okay. This guy is the guy that's writing this.
That's a very good point. That's a very good point. And then it says, Andreas Babler, who took over as leader of the Social Democratic Party in June, has a long history of opposing not just NATO, but Austrian participation in any EU defense initiatives. In 2020, he said the EU is the most aggressive military alliance that has ever existed, adding that it was worse than NATO. It's an extraordinary assertion, given that NATO is the only thing that kept the Soviet Union from swallowing Austria during the Cold War. I thought we agreed that it was the neutrality treaty. Didn't you just say that was the neutrality treaty?
Yeah, another Borrellian self-own in this one. Okay.
Right.
Did you figure out you forgot what you wrote a few paragraphs
right, exactly.
above?
Yeah, swallowing Austria. I mean, yeah, it's just they never swallowed Austria. I mean, it's never right.
Well, if they did, they just gorged it.
Exactly.
Okay?
But they never even set up, even though they never set up a communist regime in Austria. It was under occupation, but they never set up a communist regime. So that was right from the start. They never intended to create a communist state in Austria. This is what I looked up this Andreas Babler, and he does seem like a very strange figure. It says Austrian Social Democrats announced wrong leader after technical error. So the moment I read things like this, I think there's something very odd going on here. Party officials say Andreas Babler won the race, not Hans-Peter Doschkozil, as previously declared due to Excel error. And then they say, there was a technical error, officials and blah, blah. They said on Monday that Andreas Babler and not Hans-Peter Doschkozil, the governor, had been declared the winner. And then he says the mistake had come to light only because a journalist had spotted a missing vote in the final results and raised the matter with the party's electoral commission, prompting a recount. And then he goes on that vying to replace the outgoing centrist leader, this Babler, 50-year-old former warehouse laborer, self-declared Marxist and longtime Eurosceptic, vowed to return Austria's Social Democrats to their left-wing roots. In an inner-party debate that focused less on policies than whether the center-left should wear its values on its sleeves, 52-year-old Doschkozil stood for a more right-wing positioning on issues such as immigration, promising to bring back voters who had switched to the Freedom Party. And then he goes, Babler, a former member of the party's Marxist-Leninist Stamokap wing, drew fire in the run-up to the party Congress for a 2-year-old video in which he talks about the EU's most aggressive foreign policy. Confronted with the comments he had made during the COVID-19 pandemic, Babler said that he did not advocate an Austrian exit from the bloc of nations, but was in favor of a socially minded reform of European treaties. This says he told the Austrian media in one interview, "I'm a Marxist," but said in a follow-up interview that he did not stand for a concept such as expropriations and a dictatorship of the proletariat. See, there's something, whenever I read things like this, again, I don't know much about Babler. I always think there's something is being played on us. I'm a Marxist, I'm a Marxist-Leninist, so this guy's pulling a fast one. Nobody talks like that. And then somehow he's doing the more lefty than thou approach. I think Lenin was a little too moderate for me. I want to be, like your friend, Zizek, Slavoj Zizek. I'm a Leninist. This is posturing. I'm Marxist-Leninist. Anyway,
it's a meaningless cultural label.
Exactly. But anyway, I looked. I'm on Wikipedia again. I mean, I'm just researching. I don't can't say I know that much about this. So here it says, on the 23rd of March 2023, Babler announced his candidacy for the Social Democratic as a surprise candidate. The results of the membership election were announced on the 22nd of May, and Babler came in second with 31.5% of the votes. Babler and other members requested that a runoff among the party members should be held between him and Hans-Peter Doskozil, who came in at 33.7. So Doskozil had won decisively. So again, seems strange. But the SPO leadership, that's the Social Democrat leadership, decided in a vote of 25 to 22 against it. Instead, an election for the party chair with the candidates Doskozil and Babler was held among 603 delegates in an extraordinary party congress on the 3rd of June. According to the first counting of the ballot on the 3rd of June, Doskozil won over Babler with 53% versus 47%. Again, decisive. As the ballot was recounted on the 5th of June, it was found that during the first counting, the votes for Babler erroneously had been attributed to Doskozil, and that vice versa, the vote for Doskozil erroneously had been attributed to Babler. Babler accepted his election as party leader on the 6th of June. So, this kind of stuff, but, we're going to count, or he wins every single vote he wins, and then, well, there was an error, turns out you won. I think, there's something going on here, and makes this all very suspicious. Anyway, that's just a side note. We'll see about this guy Babler. We'll watch him. To me, he seems like a phony. He's a sort of a kind of a leftish version of Giorgia Meloni. I think somebody who tells me he's a Marxist-Leninist, he's the one who's going to be the first to sell out.
Who's that? Congressman from New York, George. What's his name?
George. George.
That guy.
Yeah, I forget. Yeah, no, but George, that George guy. I mean, he was just a hustler. This guy, I think, is more he's more of a kind of AOC type. You present yourself one thing. I'm so far left. I'm a real radical, and then you cave in immediately. Anyway, so back to this. Austria's neutrality and geographic good fortune have led it to spend the next to nothing on defense. Last year, for example, spending fell to just 0.8% of GDP from 0.9%, putting it near the bottom of the EU league table with the likes of Luxembourg, Ireland, and Malta. But at least,
well, it's kind of like Trump, Yeah, I don't pay a lot of taxes. I have lawyers to do that, and so Austria has treaties to do that. Yeah. What do you expect?
Right. Yeah. No. Exactly. We're going to get a free ride. I mean, that's the whole point. I mean, that everyone's always the free rider problem. If you can get a free ride, why wouldn't you get a free ride? Yeah, let somebody else pay for it. And somebody else will pay for it, because the Americans always will pay for it, because they want NATO. Well, they like it so much, cough up the money. Austria, we don't care about any of this defense, and they pretty much have said we don't need defense because there's no one threatening us. The only people threatening us are migrants, crossing the border illegally. That's the only thing we need to worry about, and that doesn't cost that much. You just need some barbed wire. But at least Austria is not as belligerent as some of the others, like Malta. Malta's quite belligerent. So at least Austrians say, well, we don't even care about any of this. So why should we spend money on stuff that we don't care about? So it says, a few years ago, the country's defense minister even proposed doing away with, quote, national defense, so that the army could concentrate on challenges such as natural disaster relief and combating cyber threats. The idea was ultimately rejected, but that it was proposed at all by a person who oversees the military, no less, illustrates how seriously Austria takes its security needs. Being sarcastic here.
Yeah, that's...
Over the past year, the government has pledged to increase defense spending, yet those plans are still well below what the country would be obligated to pay were it in NATO. Yeah, but
it's not in NATO. But it's not in NATO.
Exactly. And that's why he doesn't want to join NATO, because he doesn't want to spend this money. Put simply, Austria is freeloading on its neighbors and the United States, and will continue to do so until it's pressured to change course. Why is it freeloading? I mean, one of the things that you could say is, why doesn't the EU do more to secure Austria's borders from migrants? I mean, that's Austria's real problem. I mean, they're concerned about illegal migrants. I mean, that should be the EU's, one for all and all for one routine. Hey, I mean, those are your security concerns. Putin is not really your number one priority. It's not even your number two, number three, number four priority. That's why it needs more straight talk from people like Schellmeyer, not less. A few weeks before his blood money remarks, the diplomat told a Vienna newspaper that the European army is NATO. Well, I mean, at least he's honest about it. Is noting that the accession of Sweden and Finland to the alliance would leave only Austria and a few small island states outside the tent. The reality check dashed Austria's hopes that it could avoid paying its share for EU defense by waiting for Brussels to create its own force. EU defense. I mean, okay. Even so, rhetoric alone is not going to convince Austria to shift course. Nearly 80% of Austrians support neutrality because it's so comfortable.
No, because it works.
Yes, 80%. It's quite extraordinary, because you think, we've had this whole hysteria, the NATO, everything, Stoltenberg and all this about we can't possibly have neutrality for Ukraine. And here's a country that had neutrality imposed on it 70 years ago. 80% say, hey, we want to stick with that. It's a good deal for us. You can see why they would hate Austria so much. I mean, that flies in the face of the whole NATO expansion thesis, because there's a country, we don't need no stinking NATO on our territory. The EU and the US need to make it uncomfortable. At the moment, most Austrians only see the upsides to neutrality. Yet that's only because the West has refused to impose any costs on the country for free riding. That needs to change.
We have the tools. We have the tools.
Exactly. Yeah. What's the plan here? I mean, are you planning on invading Austria? Like you're gonna march in, like Hitler marched in, and just say, that's it. You are now, Anschluss within NATO. Critics of a more aggressive approach towards Vienna argue that it will only harden the population's resolve to sustain neutrality and bolster the far right. That may be true in the short term, but the history of foreign pressure on Austria, especially from Washington, be it the isolation it faced during the Waldheim affair and the push to compensate slave laborers from the war, shows that interventions ultimately work. If forced to choose between remaining in the Western fold or facing isolation, Austrians will always choose the former. Well, that's not true. I mean, they kept Waldheim. I mean, they kept all the threats about Waldheim. They still voted for Waldheim. Waldheim completed his term in office and then left. I mean, so they didn't say, oh, no, we'll get rid of Waldheim. Just don't hit us, please.
It sounds like the author of this piece is, basically, we need to pick up Austria and move it somewhere.
That's right.
Yeah, it's so infantile. This kind
it is. Yeah, we gotta really lean on that. We gotta get tough.
As if you have nothing else to do. It's Austria. Okay.
Well, exactly. As I said, I mean, normally it's Orban. I think Orban's getting the week off. Then he's not getting trashed this week. Next week we'll come back there. But so it's the turn of Austria, and then the problem is that no one is forcing them. If Austria's partners continue to avoid a confrontation, the country is likely to continue its slide towards Orbanism.
Wow, that's a big word. Big word.
The Freedom Party, which wants to suspend EU aid for Ukraine and lift sanctions against Russia, leads the polls by a widening margin. It really is. I mean, it's way ahead of everyone else in the polls, with just a year until the next election. With neighboring Slovakia on a similar trajectory, Russian President Vladimir Putin may soon have a major foothold in the heart of the EU.
Yeah. It's like Victoria Nuland going to Niger, but just don't let Wagner in. Okay? Your whole foreign policy is in tatters. Okay,
Yes.
and but it's don't let Wagner in. Okay, this is the same thing. Ridiculous.
That's right. So far, the EU and Washington has been silent on Freedom Party's worrying rise, counting on Austrians to snap out of it. Is that what they're counting on? I mean, it's way ahead in the polls. I mean, it's I don't see there's any evidence that they have any intention of snapping out of it. Barring foreign pressure, they won't. Why would they? With its populist prescriptions and beer hall rhetoric, the Freedom Party encourages Austrians to see themselves as what they most want to be, victims. Now, as far as I can see, the only thing of the Freedom Party, they say we don't want any war with Russia. We don't care about Ukraine. We care about our farmers, and we don't want illegal migrants coming in and spoiling our very nice the life we have here. Where's the beer hall rhetoric? I don't quite know. I mean, they want to maintain the kind of good life that Austria has enjoyed for 70 years.
The Austrians are the luckiest people, and you look at the aftermath of the Second World War. Yep, the Baltic states, Poland, all the way going down to the Adriatic. Yeah, they didn't come out on top. It took a long time. Okay, right. I get that. Right. Austria, they dodged the bullet. I mean, this is I'd be really proud. I'd be like, yeah, it's worked for so long. Why, if it's not broken, why do we need to fix it?
Exactly. And when you think of it, like 1918 through to 1945, that was a miserable time for Austria. That was not a happy time. Those 30 years, they don't want to go back to that. And instead, we've had 70 years, which have been a very happy time. So they decide, well, what do you want to do? Want to go back to the pre-World War II era, or we enjoy the post-World War II era? That's what 80% say. Yeah, I think made their voices clear.
Well, I'm sorry. I really feel insulted by this victims. I mean, everything that this been presented here. I mean, I just still don't get why they look at themselves as victims.
Yeah. None. I mean, there's exactly. Where's the evidence? I mean, they've come along with say victims. It's a conceit. They say, oh well, because of this Moscow Declaration, they said that they were victims. But where there's nothing in this that suggests that they're victims. They just they just want to continue the life that they're enjoying. They haven't said that they're victims.
Well, it's so interesting, George. The EU, is always posturing about Ukraine's sovereignty, but it doesn't give a rat's ass about Austria's sovereignty, does it?
No. That's the thing. I mean, with the EU and NATO, there's a right to join NATO, but there's no right not to join NATO. I mean, that's the key. There's no right not to join. So therefore, that's why they leaned on Ukraine the moment Yanukovych declared that we're not joining NATO, we're not joining any military bloc. That sealed the fate of Yanukovych. So now they're leaning on Austria because it insists on sticking to this treaty from 70 years ago. So this was Politico, and now this is the Times. Rupert Murdoch's Times. Waltz with the Devil. That's a very subtle headline. Why Russian spies love Austria. A former intelligence chief says Vienna is a hotbed of espionage, and that the real winner of next year's elections may be Russia. And so here's this picture from way back when Putin visited Austria and then danced with this Karin Geinsler, whatever, who's now living, I think she lives in St. Petersburg. But she was Austria's foreign minister at the time. More than 3 decades after the end of the Cold War, Peter Gridling, the former chief of the office of the Federal Office for the Protection of the Constitution Counterterrorism, that's basically MI5 or FBI, reckons several hundred spies are still based in Vienna, mostly under diplomatic cover, although in recent years the city has ceded its status as the espionage capital of Europe to Brussels, reflecting the growing power of the European Union. Well, several hundred spies, that doesn't sound a lot much. I mean, you always assume that most embassies have an awful lot of spies on their staff. I mean, what else? That's how you do your spying. You use the embassy as a cover. So, what's the beef? Where's the story? Then so the Russians have remained by far the largest group, just as they were back in the late 1940s when Orson Welles walked the streets of Vienna as Harry Lime in Carol Reed's film The Third Man. Now, it's very important to remember, none of that has anything to do with spying, the Cold War. I mean, if you've seen The Third Man, that it had nothing to do with any of that. I mean, it was a city under occupation, and they had the British, the Americans, and the French occupying forces. They had nothing to do with spying. I mean, it was just there were a lot of shady characters wandering around in post-war Vienna. This says, but Gridling is concerned the Kremlin could be poised to gain a potential ally on the inside. The strongly Russophile far-right Freedom Party, which has been topping opinion polls for the past year and is poised to enter or even lead the government after elections in October next year. Notice also, I mean, they say this, oh my God, the Freedom Party, but they never reflect on, well, why do you think this party that you hate so much, that the world media hates so much, and all the important people hate so much, why are they doing so well? I mean, shouldn't it be obvious that they're so horrible? I mean, isn't their evil manifest? I mean, why do they keep voting for this, supporting this party, just like with the Alternative für Deutschland? I mean,
maybe because Austria first.
Exactly.
A wild stab at it.
Exactly. Austria first, yes. You kind of expect most political leaders to advocate for their country first. I mean, it goes with the territory. If you want to lead a country, you say, hey, my people come first. In a democracy, every election result is to be expected, is to be accepted. And the Freedom Party is a legal party in Austria that currently has a very large approval rating of 30%. But the experiences I had in office were such as to make me think, can you trust this party with security? I am now retired, and I'm concerned as a citizen that we as a society should look very carefully at who will fill which ministries and what will happen in them. So this is the former
democracy is so dangerous, so dangerous.
Exactly, yeah. So yeah, exactly. This is the former head of MI5, the former FBI chief, says, I'm very concerned. Who will fill the ministries? Well, how about the people that people vote for? I mean, maybe they're the right people to fill the ministries, and they ran for office and they won. I mean, that's the way democracy works. Gridling's concerns are based on the 2 years from 2017 when the Freedom Party served as a junior member in a coalition under then Chancellor Sebastian Kurz. This is the leader of the center-right Austrian People's Party. The Interior Minister, Gridling's boss, was Herbert Kickl, a prominent Freedom Party member who has since become the party's leader. In a new book, Surprise Attack, Gridling, who previously ran Europol's anti-terror unit, expressed dismay at Kurz's decision to give the Freedom Party such a sensitive ministry, given long-standing concerns about its closeness to Russia and role in spreading Russian propaganda. Well, these concerns, these are just stories that you've put out yourself. I mean, you said their closeness to Russia. I mean, you put this stuff out, and they're spreading Russian propaganda, and they say, well, now this is a matter of concern. That closeness was underlined in December 2016 when its leaders traveled to Moscow to sign a 5-year working agreement with the pro-Kremlin United Russia Party, posting a photograph of themselves from Red Square, which most people do when they go visit Moscow. They post a photograph of themselves in Red Square. Bizarre further proof of the party's links with the Kremlin came in August 2018 when President Putin traveled to Austria to be guest of honor at the wedding of Karin Knissel, whom the party had installed as foreign minister. It was rather surprising for us that the Russian leader came here. Gridling said with some understatement. Last week, Knissel announced that she had moved to St. Petersburg, shipping her belongings and 2 ponies in a Russian military transport plane. Well, she was foreign minister at the time. And again, a wild guess, she thought it might be an idea to have good relations with Russia.
I remember an American politician said that once.
Yes, I think that's right. And so, and again, this guy he's a shadowy spy chief, and he said, well, very, very, very troubled by this. Well, you didn't run for office. I mean, it's like that goes, if you run for office, then you can you get to set policy. Because of his concerns, Gridling continued to investigate the party's activities, involving both Russia and its own ties with extremist right-wing groups at home while it was in government. He held back sensitive material to Kickle, and in March 2018, Kickle responded by suspending the intelligence chief following an unprecedented police raid on the agency's headquarters. Well, again, Kickle was the elected minister. I mean, he's a minister whose party had won power. He says, I held back sensitive material from the minister, from elected leaders. The Times, of course, approves of this because, of course, we had the same thing in the United States, where you had, the deep state that decided that we're just going to keep things away from the president. But again, this is just, you get this stuff in the media, and nobody sort of wonders, hey, where'd you get off a security chief deciding that he's going to keep sensitive material away from the eyes of his boss, the minister, the elected representative of the people?
Hunter Biden laptop.
Exactly. That's right. A court later ordered Gridling's reinstatement. And alarmed at what was going on in Austria, the intelligence agencies of other Western countries, Britain's MI5 among them, also began to hold back information out of concern that we would not be able to protect it appropriately, and it might end up in the hands of others. Britain's MI5. I mean, I wouldn't want to share anything. It was difficult. I mean, these are the people. This is the Christopher Steele. He was in MI6. But I mean, the whole idea that the British have any right to criticize anyone else's intelligence services. How the hell did you have a guy like Christopher Steele on your staff? He was head of your Russian mission. I mean, he was the overall boss. It was difficult to know precisely what had been withheld. When it comes to intelligence cooperation, there is no obligation to tell a partner everything, but it was clear that the quantity of intelligence shared with Austria has fallen back. And then the world's spies continue to exploit what Gridling calls, with regret, the relatively weak legal situation for combating intelligence activities in Austria, a product of its long-standing balancing act between East and West. Though the rules and penalties for espionage have recently been tightened, they are still weak compared with those in other European countries. And then it rarely comes to legal proceedings or arrests. And it said, normally matters are instead settled silently, with a suspect told they are persona non grata and they must leave quietly. It is sometimes frustrating because we get pressure from abroad to do more, but if the legal system does not let you, then you either have to live with it or change the legal system.
Yeah, well, yeah. So why don't you take to heart your own words? Yeah.
Yeah. And so we have repeatedly pointed out that we have to change laws to act more successfully. But of course, this only happens with some delay. So that's...
Well, that means, why don't you just ban the party? That just will take care of everything, yeah?
That's right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that's Austria. I mean, clearly the senior members of NATO are very displeased with the small country of 8 million in the center of Europe that doesn't seem to want to get with the NATO program. Sweden has done it, Finland has done it. What's holding up Austria? And I think this is I think going to be a new trend, because I think the Freedom Party will win the elections next year in Austria, and I think we're going to get a massive campaign against Austria.
Yeah, but see,
about now.
This trend is to undermine democratic institutions and parties. Okay, their scope is it's unending. It must be, they must have this most powerful bloc, everyone in lockstep, all the elites answering to their masters in Brussels and in Washington. You can, just as George said, you're not allowed to opt out. Okay.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Exactly. They're not able to present any argument. In other words, I mean, if you look at this Politico argument, as well, what's your argument that Austria should abandon neutrality? Whoa, we saved you. You're only, the only reason the Soviet Union didn't swallow you up is because of NATO. That's about the best you can do. Of course, it's absolute nonsense, as they themselves said. It was a neutrality treaty as a condition of the withdrawal of occupying forces. And so, they're freeloading. Well, they're not freeloading. I mean, they don't, they're just not part of NATO. I mean, so they don't have any arguments other than, well, you better get with the program or you're going to get one of these, because but that's about it. Other than these threats, there isn't any argument as to why it's to Austria's advantage to abandon neutrality.
Well, why does the EU have a representative in Austria?
Austria's no idea. Yeah, that is selfless. Yes,
like a viceroy or something.
I don't know. It sounds like somebody is supervising. They need this, just as this article said. They need to be supervised. They don't trust the Austrians, so they need this. And again, who the hell is he as a bureaucrat to go around criticizing elected governments? But again, this is the norm in the EU, whereby some guy appointed by Brussels apparently has seniority over elected leaders.
Well, it's a pattern here. Like, I think we're going to hear a lot more and more about Austria until they're brought to heel. Okay, yes. And just to vilify victims. Okay, all right. I mean, the NATO, it creates victims, okay? But, people are victimized by its own policies. Because they won't join, okay? Yes. They weren't in Finland and Sweden. What were the referendum results, George? I forget.
Yeah, I forget.
No, they didn't have them, did they? Oh, that's right.
Damn, I forgot. You're right. It's one of those things that always forgot that nowhere did they have referendums during the NATO expansion. The one country that had a referendum in Hungary, and there weren't enough people that took part in that referendum to make it binding. But so in any case, they said, okay, fine, but Hungary voted in favor of the referendum. But nowhere else, after that example with Hungary, that people just didn't show up to vote, they decided, we're not taking the chances at all. No one gets to vote on whether they want NATO. So that's it. That's the policy, because you would lose, because nobody wants it. I mean, but so it gets thrust on them. And then once they're there, they just say, well, just leave us out of it. We'll make all the right noises, but just kind of leave us out of it. Unfortunately, you can't really play that game. I mean, NATO never leaves anyone out of it.
Right. It just, these hegemonic tendencies, they just have this kind of messianic, drive to them. They absolutely, everyone has to be on board, no dissent, I mean, it's like, let's go to door. Let's make sure. Okay. It's really maniacal, George.
It really is. And just like those referendums they had on the EU, which they always lost them. So, we'll do it over again. You go, let's say, like even the French, what about the vote, the social charter? Nah, we don't want the social charter. We're gonna have to do it all over again. And then they just keep doing the same referendum over and over again until they get the right result. So the important thing is never to put anything to a vote. I mean, because you're not gonna get people to vote in the way you want them to.
In the last 20 months, no country in the Western world had a vote on Ukraine.
That's right. Exactly. And they know it. They know perfectly well that there's absolutely no support for this war anywhere, not in the United States, not in the UK, not nowhere. You know, it's just it's you know other than the elite media, the elite politicians, there's no support at all, and that's why they're so terrified. You know, they got the Freedom Party, you've got this guy in Slovakia, and they know that the people, the moment somebody's going to say, "Yeah, hey, we've got enough problems of our own. You know, why are we worrying about Ukraine?" They know that that's it. That's going to be a winning message.
For Austria, I mean, it's done all of the right things. I actually kind of admire how adept they are in managing the great powers around them. Okay, they've cultivated a garden. Okay, no Burrell pun intended here, and they're doing pretty good for themselves. I mean, yeah, that's what it's all about. Okay, it's a rich country, high standard of living. They don't pop their head up and cause trouble for anybody. They just want to be left alone to do their own thing. I mean,
that's right.
What's wrong with that? I mean, give me more of that.
yeah, no, but that's right. But there isn't that, you know, you don't have that luxury in today's Europe. Austria, Serbia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, they're all within the crosshairs. They've left Switzerland alone for the time being, but I don't even know that they're definitely going to leave Switzerland alone forever.
You know, in closing here, so you gave us two sources, as usual, George's incredible forensic review of things. And all I can say is both articles are beer hall rhetoric, okay? It's true. If there's any kind of beer hall rhetoric, it's in the media.
Right. Exactly. Full of stereotypes. I mean, it's all, you know, the disdain, you know, they're the victims and all the rest. I mean, and then all the bringing up, again, stuff from 80, 90 years ago. I mean, you know, about the 1930s.
Well, this writer, you know, bringing up Article 51, you know, I think he thought he was really, really smart, but actually it backfires against his whole argument.
Right. Yeah.
Again, did he not understand what the word said?
No, they would never do. They're trying to, they do this to intimidate you. I said, whoa, boy, there's a treaty here. It's like, you know, like we've had this before, like the Budapest Memorandum, or, you know, the Article 5, and you go, whoa, but, you know, we're on the hook. You know, we have to go to war.
When Ukraine gave up its nukes.
Yeah, exactly. Wow, they gave up their nukes. You know that, you know that. So you know, and then, you know, when you look at this, there's absolutely nothing here that obligates anyone to do anything. You know, it's just the same with the Budapest Memorandum. It's called a memorandum. It's not even called a treaty, like, you know, in the way like the North Atlantic Treaty. It's not even a treaty. It's a Budapest Memorandum. The whole idea that somehow, you know, we're now on the hook for Ukraine. But again, since nobody ever bothers to look these things up, you know, that's pretty serious. You know, we pledged to go to war on behalf of Ukraine in the Budapest Memorandum.
Yeah, they try to intimidate you and create their own facts that have very specific meaning, a derived meaning that somehow bolsters their argument. But in fact, if you read the fine print, it actually detracts from the argument. Okay? But they don't expect anyone to, you know, do what George does and say, well, let's see what that actually says.
Yes.
All right, everybody, we're going to keep an eye on Austria. It looks like it's got a target on its back. No surprise there. We're going to keep an eye on it. And the Freedom Party, they're going to win. They're right on track. Okay. Much to the chagrin of everybody in the West.
Yes.
All right, everybody, this is the Gaggle with Peter and George, who are on local. So please go to the Gaggle. Go to thegaggle.locals.com. Please go to our store, and please remember that George has his live stream tomorrow.
Exactly. Live stream, 3 p.m. Eastern time. Come with comments, criticism, suggestions. Everything is welcome. And on the way out the door, think about little Buddy, and Buddy's saying, hey, look, I like my holidays in Austria like as much as the next man. I mean, you know, you can get a lot done there. And so I don't like Austria being trash. So keeping Buddy's predilections in mind, if you have a few bob in your pocket, whip him out, dunk him in his tip jar. He'll be well satisfied. We're very grateful for all of your help and friendship and support. The more you're able to donate, the more of these videos we can make, the more we can improve the technology, and above all, we can, keep Buddy enjoying his European lifestyle. So remember, if you like the gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you soon. Bye.